Welcome to Table Talk, and today I'm joined by my wife Fumi, and we've got a special guest,
Hi.
David here, and we're going to discuss the topic of being a teenager and being a Christian in the world we're living in today, to see the challenges that might come out of that. So we're kind of hoping this is going to be useful to you all, so please stay tuned and enjoy. I want to begin this conversation by saying that I was never raised in a Christian family, so I've got no idea what that is like to be raised in that environment. I'm not saying I wasn't raised in a nice family, but there was God and things just was not a part of it, if you wish, So some people come from a totally different direction. That's not my experience, so I don't feel qualified to say much about that. But I will say maybe something a little bit later. If I had been raised in that environment, things might have been kind of different. So, Fumi, what about you? Was you raised in a religious environment, if you want to use that word?
Yes, I was definitely raised in a religious environment. Both my parents were religious Christians. My dad was Methodist and my mom was Roman Catholic. But they weren't strictly that religion. They were quite happy to go to other places as well. Pentecostal, white garments, but because we were brought up in Nigeria, in West Africa.
Yeah.
So yes, a lot of growing up.
So you had it full on, if you wish, but from a whole different aspects of background.
As far as I can remember, they believed in God as the creator. They believed that Jesus was the Son of God, and they did their best, I think, to try and bring us up in that, with that ethos and with that belief.
Okay. Okay, and David, what about you?
Well, technically speaking, I'm still growing up. But it's been very interesting because not even just as a teenager, but also as a kid, you kind of notice that there's a difference. One of the things our parents wanted me and my sister to have is like a context of Christ in everything we do. So they would send us to Catholic primary schools and also Catholic secondary schools. But the interesting thing is, once I got to I think it was year 9 in secondary school, I wanted to try engineering. So my parents were like, "Great, we'll get you to this engineering academy." And I switched secondary schools, and I noticed the difference immediately. There was no praying like this. In fact, there was no praying at all. And also the way the students carry themselves. I mean, there were obviously naughty kids in the Catholic schools, but also it was vastly different in the engineering academy. That's on top of that, I guess.
So when you talk about them carrying themselves, when I hear people say they're carrying themselves, I often wonder, is it on piggyback? Are they carrying people around? And just, I understand what you mean, but some people would think that maybe if they're not thinking right, I guess, at the end of the day. But like I said at the start, I wasn't raised in that religious environment, but do you think it was beneficial?
100%. And I think also the fact that years ago, when you compare religious beliefs years ago, I won't say how old I am, but tens of years ago, and a different continent, different country to the Western world, now it's different. Where back in Africa, Asia, people are religious. A lot more people are religious. They are religious countries, if I can quote. While here in Great Britain, for example, it's not really a religious country. And so, as you said, going from a religious school to a non-religious school, you will see the vast difference.
Immediately.
Yeah. But growing up in West Africa, because people on the whole were religious, you didn't see that much of a difference if you went from a religious school, because part of my primary school, first grade
Yeah.
In my days, we said primary and secondary school. That's not what you say now. That's tertiary in grey hairs. You wouldn't see much of a difference. I went to religious school, and I also went to a non-religious private school, and
so you can see the difference between.
There wasn't that much of a difference because people
Everybody
still
was
prayed.
yeah.
People still
Yeah,
listened
yeah.
because people were brought up to be religious.
So in that environment, then you said earlier there was a positive
Yes.
impact. In
Yes.
what way would it be positive?
I think in the sense of there is somebody who is higher than you and knows you and sees you, and I think that gave everybody, well, my parents and myself, there's a sense of discipline,
Right.
a sense of right and wrong, and a sense of an attitude of the way you behave and responsibility. If
Well,
that makes sense.
coming from the other side, who wasn't raised in that environment, I could easily see in the sin the same. You know, there was no religious activities within our household, but I still had a sense of discipline. I still had an awareness of what's right and wrong. You know, and what you should do and what you shouldn't do, what you should say and what's acceptable and all these sort of things. And that's outside of the religious environment. So what I'm trying to understand is you know, what makes that special to you, that something I've never experienced. 'Cause in my mind, when I hear about people being raised in an environment, I think of, oh look, they've been raised in a religious bubble. I see this bubble all around them where they're not really experiencing life because it's kept condensed. Is that?
I think I was raised in a little bit of a bubble, but I don't think it was a lot of a bubble because you still go to school, you still mix with other kids, and you know I went to at the beginning of my A levels, my first year A levels in Nigeria, I was in boarding school.
Yeah.
You know, okay, you could sneak out and go home because you get on the bus and go home, get some food and come back. But you had to be in boarding school for the first year. So again, that's people with different ethos, different backgrounds mixing together. I think for me, the key was the fact that there was somebody who cared so much for me, who loved me so much, and who I knew will always be with me, irrespective of. While, for example, in boarding school, my parents were not there.
Yeah, I understand that, and you're coming back to you, David, because it's not being the devil's advocate, but it's like I'm saying, it's like, in my mind, some people raised within that religious family are almost like in a religious bubble. Is that how you see it from being inside that perspective, or kind of like Fumi says, well, to a degree, but you're still having to mix with people who are not a part of that bubble, if you wish?
I think actually there is a downside, if you will. Some of the friends I've made growing up as a kid also had parents that were like religious, so to speak. But I noticed the difference between their parents and my parents is my parents were never forceful. If me and my sister never got ready on time to go to worship, they said, okay, stay home and we'll go. And they left. But yeah, when it was for them, they would always come late to worship because no matter what, they must be in worship. Even if they're not engaged, they just must be there.
Yeah.
And the issue with that is when we became teenagers, they would like sneakily do stuff. I noticed it was actually worse with the kids who did have religious parents, because they weren't like so much scared of what they were doing. They were scared of what would happen if their parents found out what they were doing. And I'm actually very thankful because our parents let us find Christ on our own. They introduced us and they just left. They didn't like just leave us to it, but they slowly like kind of pushed us in the right direction. Even the day I got baptized, my dad had no idea that was gonna happen. We were on our way to worship, and my dad was driving, and I said to him, "Dad, you know what? I want to do this thing. I want to get baptized." And he even asked me, "Really? Like, are you sure you know what you're doing?" Because I know some because I also come from an African background. I know some African parents would like, they would be the ones first to say, okay, you will get baptized or you must get baptized. But yeah, my dad would, you could see the excitement on his face, but he didn't want to force me. So he kept asking me, are you sure? Are you sure? I eventually said, yes, I really, really want to do it. I understand it. I've been listening in Bible study. I know what it means to be baptized. And with like a kind of giggle in his voice, he called my mom, because I remember she was still back home. And he said to her, bring towels and bring extra clothes. I will never forget that day. But yeah, no. It's very, very interesting.
So, sorry.
I was just going to say that, you mentioning about, parents being forceful. We got that as well, but in the sense of when we were being brought up in a religious home, it was looking back, that was my parents' faith. And they would take us wherever they went. So if we were going to the worship service, they would take us. If we were going to as Roman Catholics, the midnight mass before Christmas, before New Year, and sort of like, which child wants to go to midnight mass in Latin at night when you want to sleep, and you had a busy day in the day, and she would drag us there. So I guess they had a sense of responsibility that this is what we believe, this is right, and so you're coming, whether you want to or not. And it's easy for some children to actually rebel against that, and say, no, I don't want that anymore. But when we grew up and we left home, it was, you had to go whichever way. And I guess I just wanted to know God more. But I know some kids who rebelled and had enough, because we were dragged everywhere. We experienced all sorts of things, and it was enough for any child to rebel. But at the same time, I could see why my parents believed God and wanted us to know, and I could appreciate their faith, but I had to develop mine.
And I think that's important. Like I said, for me, not being raised in that environment, I've got no experience of it. But sometimes I wonder, if I was raised in that environment, would that have prevented me from doing some of the stupid things I did when I grew up? Especially when I became a teacher, would that have had an impact on my life? I can't answer that because I've never experienced it. So I don't know. I'd like to think, well, yeah. If I was raised in that environment and I decided Jesus was for me, if you wish, and I was serious about it, then I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have made some of the crazy mistakes. So, go back to you a little bit, David. Do you think that upbringing has really helped you now that you're a teenager, you're at uni, and you're really starting to experience the world and what the world has got to offer? Does that help?
I will say yes, because it offers perspective. And perspective, I say, is a treasure. Because, actually, one of the things you just said, before I answer, one of the things you said was, would it have changed? Would I have still done some stupid stuff? I'll still say yeah. Maybe not on the scale that you may have, I don't know what you've done, but I've done stupid things before. Even with my parents not being so forceful. But I think with the way that we were brought up, it was easier to come back to yourself because you have the consciousness of God. But to answer your question, like experiencing life as is, almost like tasting adulthood for the first time by myself.
I like the way you say tasting adulthood. Yeah, I'm about to get there. I'm so excited.
2 decades old. But yeah, it's also interesting because, like I said, in uni, I personally find it easy to make friends, even with like non-Christians. But
excuse, did you say you got friends?
I have friends.
Oh wow! I'm impressed.
Friends. Yeah, thank you very much. It's been very, very hard. I would get invited to all sorts, and I'd have to decline. And sometimes they'd ask why, and it's like, well, here's why. It's like, because I believe in this, and I have these principles. And they wouldn't understand, but obviously they can't force me to go where I don't want to go. And I've noticed it's not so much of a yeah, my mom and dad wouldn't want me to do that anymore. Now it's like I'm not doing that myself. I'm not thinking about mom and dad. I'm thinking about God, and it's very, very interesting. I've also had like friends who I would have spent like a good amount of time with them. I would have bonded over any game that we played together. I would have shown them any anime that we'd watched, and then when they learned I was Christian, they would automatically pull back. Like they just stop talking to me because they themselves don't want to get judged or whatever. But
so how do you deal with that? Because it's almost like being rejected, isn't it?
it is. It's not even like it. You just have been rejected. At first I found it distasteful. I was like, but what about everything we've already done? Like that doesn't just stop existing. But now it's like I've tried to come from a place of understanding, because I know they must have experienced something in the past with a Christian or someone who calls themselves Christian, and that was very, very like harsh. And there is the general belief that Christians are always judgmental. I was telling you about this the other day. Back in secondary school, when I went to the engineering academy, whenever a kid would swear and I was around, they'd start apologizing to me.
Yeah.
Like, oh, sorry, David, we didn't know you were there. We know it's wrong to swear. But I know they still,
still do it.
Yeah,
Yes.
when I'm not there, I know they'll still do
Yeah.
it. It's because they have this consciousness that Christians are supposed to be so hard and stuff. But yeah, that's me, I guess.
It's interesting you brought that up, because even though you were not brought up in a Christian or religious family, there were still certain standards that you had to live by, and that applies to everybody on average across the globe. But when you leave home, I mean, I didn't just leave home. I moved country, I moved continent. You know, when I was 16. So that is like going from
The fire to the oven.
from
The oven to the fire.
Did you say
16?
yeah, I came over when I was 16,
Oh, yeah.
and you know, I had to. I realized, I had to decide how I was going to live. And anybody who says that Christian, you know, those who are brought up in a Christian home, when they go, they don't change, they're well behaved all the time. That's a lie, because you mix with people. You will go to the pubs and you will drink as much as you want, because you've never been there, and you will try it. Have I gotten drunk? Yes. Have I been to parties? Have I done stuff that I wouldn't want to say on air? Yes. You know, things that I'm sorry about, and okay, I definitely won't do that again, and I wouldn't want my children to do that. Don't do that. That's understandable, but that would happen.
It's kind of like what we're talking about today, isn't it? Where when you're young, you get this picture of what the world is really like, or what you think the world is really like. And, you know, like I was saying, being a Christian, a teenage Christian, must be some challenge today, a difficult challenge today for a lot of teenagers. And, you know, we hear, don't we, it happens in all churches where the kids grow up, they leave the house and they go to university or college and they leave. And you never see them again. And some go on and do crazy things, you know, that are absolutely sinful in all shapes and departments. And I can understand to a degree, because that's the reality of the world. Because even though I wasn't raised in that environment, when I went out to the world, it was still a whole new environment. It was all of a sudden there was all of this stuff available, you know, you can get involved in, and I wasn't responsible to my parents because I didn't have a lot of respect for my parents, to my shame. But you know, that world is out there. But I guess what we're saying here, or trying to say, is that even though you're a Christian, and even though you've been raised in that environment, and even though you're a teenager right now, when you go to the real world, all the stuff that was an offer to me is still an offer to you.
Exactly.
It just comes in different shapes and different forms, and everybody's got a lovely version of this and a lovely version of that, and on the surface you think that's okay, but actually deep down it's difficult. So when it comes to being teenagers today, I take my hat off, and I personally think that, you know, although mum and dad do what they can to help and support, I think this is where the church as a whole comes together to give them that support network, because whether we like it or not, there will be some kids that mess up. And it's the church, to me, and the parents' responsibility of just opening their arms up and saying, come in, and we'll love you anyway, you know. And I think that's vitally, vitally important. So, kind of bring all this together a little bit, unless you've got any last thoughts on this, and then we'll bring it together.
Maybe. What you just talked about, the support thing, I think there is a lack thereof. One of the interesting things about being a Christian, a teenage Christian, is there isn't many of you out there, and when you may find them, there is this pressure and like fear they have of the world that will change them. I mean, I don't blame anyone for feeling fear, because the stuff the world threatens to do to you just because of your faith is too much. It's rough, but because of that, they bend, they fold, and then you're left alone, like without that support that you initially had from your peers. So I do appreciate the whole like the church needs to come together and be there, because who else will be there if not your own peers?
I think that, yeah, sorry.
I think not only the church, I think it's a two-pronged thing. It's both sides. The teenager has to want to, and the church needs to do and has to want to. And it's not, I'm not talking about on a Sunday morning, how are you doing, how was school, how was this, how was that. No, it's actually being a part of their lives, engaging with them apart from Sunday. You know, these days we've got social media, you've got texting, you can WhatsApp, if you can just check, how are you doing, how are things, are you okay, and build a relationship with them, so that when they have difficulty, they will know that there is somebody they can talk to. That's not there for a lot of kids at the moment.
It's a really interesting topic, and I've kind of dealt with this before in the past with other congregations. But let me ask you, from your point of view, David, do you think it would have been even more beneficial if you had a whole congregation talking about these things, about the challenges, the realities? Do you think that would have helped you be more aware of what's coming? I know you're intelligent enough to know most stuff, but some stuff comes at you sideways and you don't even know it's come there, you know. So I'm just wondering, would that have helped you prepare to go out there if the church was honest enough to talk about drugs and alcohol and sex outside marriage and all that sort of stuff?
You know what I'm thankful for? The congregation where I grew up in wasn't so much like a massive church building with like hundreds of members. It was more like a 10, 20, 15 people type thing. And because of our few numbers, that helped us to become more than just like a congregation. It was a family.
Yes.
And I grew up in that family. Like, if I were to grow up in like a massive church building, a lot of people I would call by their names. But if you noticed, I've ended up calling everyone uncle and auntie because of how close we are.
Makes it easier.
Yeah. I do always say you can't prepare for everything.
Oh, no, absolutely. Yeah.
You can try, and it may have been to some degree beneficial, but I do not at all regret how I've gotten here, so to speak. I was prepared actually to some degree, not necessarily like, oh, there's this, A, B, C, D, but I was warned, and thanks to my parents, I was shown multiple different examples, live examples of how things could go wrong.
So it's like that saying, isn't it? Is it forewarned or something?
Forewarned, forearmed.
You got 4 arms? You got 4 arms? I've only got 2 arms. But yeah,
If you want, you forewarned, forearmed.
So let me kind of bring this together again, just by bringing the scriptures a little bit. One, and again, if you've got a thought on this, just jump in. But one person I was thinking about was Joseph, when he ended up in Egypt, you know. And you remember the story with Potiphar's wife.
Yeah.
She's trying to seduce him and get him to do everything, to get the bed together type thing. But you know, he was wise enough to see through what was going on, and he was wise enough to say no.
Not even no. How could I do this against God?
Yes, yeah. Exactly. And what happened as a result of it? He ended up in prison for something that he never done. And I see you know, the way Christianity is going today, and especially you guys are going to get it even more when you get a bit older, is that when Christians do speak out, there could be a time when they end up being put in prison. Because why? Because you're quoting what happened here. You're doing what Joseph said is right. And I think that's just one example of many when, like you said, the approach with a Christian or a teenage Christian is to remind themselves, why would they do such a thing against God? That's the first protocol. I mean, you think that first, that protects everything else that's coming up, doesn't it? And at the same time, you might end up in a bit of trouble like Joseph did, but at the end of the day, his conscience was clear. And God was still with him, even though he was in prison.
And he had a great ending, because the story didn't end with him.
Oh, yeah.
Too,
No.
Yeah.
Things turn around for the better. I mean, you know, because of the different things that can happen through your teenage years, even when you're in your early 20s, you're still a young person, you're a young adult, and sometimes it can affect you very adversely and drastically, and you're thinking, I don't know where to go, I don't know who to go to, or whatever. I don't want to go to somebody within church, even if you're a Christian, because, you know, I might be, you know, judged, not listened to, shouted or whatever. And you know, I can understand people who have just gone way off board or have thought about committing suicide.
Yeah.
But the thing about believing in God is when you know that suicide is not something that He loves and He doesn't want us to commit, and life is precious to Him, and that is just like Joseph, you have that barrier of I will not cross, I cannot cross, and then you trust God because you have to start leaning on Him even
like
when
an
things
anchor.
are bad.
Yeah.
And one last thing before we finish up, I think it's important to ask the question. You know, when Paul writes to his young friend Timothy, he said, well, do you remember what he said concerning his youth?
Do not let others
look down upon you
because you are young.
Because you are young. Do you think that's a problem? It's maybe not at your home congregation, but maybe you've heard it at other congregations. Do you think the generation gap is so big that they just look down at you as if you're not important? Do you think that's, or has that been too far?
I mean, it's not like I haven't experienced it, but I haven't experienced it in like a great quantity. At least in our congregation, I was always supported. I was always pushed to the front to do something because they wanted to see me grow. And that's why I'm here now. So I'm thankful.
But did you want to be pushed?
I did, which is one of the reasons why they pushed, because they knew I wanted to. But I have definitely experienced it, more so in schools. But it got to a point where, like, I mean, back in like early secondary school, we had RE, and our RE teacher couldn't like pronounce Deuteronomy properly, and I was like, it's Deuteronomy. She's like, really? I said, yeah, and immediately the whole class was looking at me. After that point, it was kind of like the teacher was careful to like call me out on my like Bible knowledge, because it was clear that I had Bible knowledge.
Yeah.
Maybe greater than hers, but
That could be a factor though, isn't it? That some people are afraid because you're young and yet you're so knowledgeable. And people see that as an intimidation, which is sad. But I think all congregations should embrace the younger ones among them, and they should be just supporting them and helping them, and if like you said, if there's a direction they want to go within the congregation, the church as a whole should be getting together to do that. And I don't think anybody should be looking down on anybody. And I could only imagine how Timothy felt when he heard these words. Because Timothy, a young man, a young evangelist, among all these olden pros, if you wish, you know, and he's probably thinking, who am I to say to them? And Paul's like, don't let that bother you. Don't let that bother you. You go right ahead and do what you need to do. Anyway, thank you for being with us. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for watching. All the information about contact and things are at the end of the video. But God bless and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.